Ladies and gentlemen, my friends, there are moments in history when a nation, once underestimated, rises not with arrogance but quiet, unstoppable confidence. Today, that nation is India, and the world, particularly the United States, is watching in awe, even disbelief, at the sheer magnitude of its latest achievement. India's transformation from a quiet observer on the world stage to a commanding global innovator is nothing short of breathtaking. It is a journey that defies prediction, one that has caught even the most seasoned analysts in Washington and beyond by surprise. The United States, long accustomed to leading the world in technological innovation and scientific breakthroughs, now finds itself watching in admiration, and yes, a degree of astonishment, as India emerges not merely as a participant, but as an architect of the future. What makes this transformation so striking is not simply India's progress, but the speed, scale, and sophistication of it. The story unfolding before our eyes is not one of imitation, but of invention, an audacious rewriting of what it means to rise in the modern world. One must remember where India began. For decades, it was dismissed as a land of potential, but not performance, of promise without precision. Yet beneath the surface, something extraordinary was happening. A silent revolution was taking place in the classrooms, in the research labs, in the small startups tucked away in Bengaluru and Hyderabad, in the quiet determination of millions of young minds who refused to accept limitation. While global powers debated, India built. While skeptics predicted failure, India invested in knowledge. And today, the results have erupted into the open, a moment of reckoning for the old order. The US is not shocked by India's ambition, it is shocked by its execution. Consider how profoundly India has transformed the very meaning of innovation. In the Western model, innovation has often been a privilege, driven by profit, protected by patents, and concentrated within elite circles. India, by contrast, has democratized innovation. It has made technology accessible, affordable, and inclusive. From the unified payments interface that revolutionized digital finance to the Chandrayaan mission that achieved what few believed possible, India has shown that great ideas need not come from great wealth. They come from vision, determination, and the collective strength of 1 billion people united by purpose. That is what has shaken global assumptions. The world expected a follower. What it got was a forerunner. The United States now finds itself studying the very model it once overlooked. How did India manage to build such an agile digital infrastructure? How did it foster such an entrepreneurial spirit among its youth? The answer lies in the unique fusion of democracy, diversity, and discipline that defines India's developmental path. Unlike centralized models of progress, India's success stems from its ability to empower individuals, to give every citizen a stake in the nation's advancement. This decentralized energy is what makes India's innovation ecosystem unstoppable. The shock in Washington is not just about what India achieved, but how it achieved it. Through openness, cooperation, and a long-term vision rooted in social progress, not just economic gain. Behind every headline of India's rise is a deeper philosophical shift. Innovation for India is not just a matter of technological advancement. It is a moral statement, a declaration that progress must serve humanity. In a world increasingly defined by competition, India's approach reminds us that technology must uplift, not exclude. That development must empower, not divide. This moral dimension This sense of responsibility fused with ambition is what truly sets India apart. It has given the world a model of innovation that is ethical, inclusive, and sustainable, a model the United States, and indeed all nations, can learn from. There is also something profoundly emotional about this journey. It speaks to the human spirit's refusal to be confined by history. India's innovators are not building from privilege. They are building from perseverance. They are the sons and daughters of farmers, teachers, and small shopkeepers who dared to dream beyond their circumstances. Every new satellite, every breakthrough in medicine, every digital leap forward carries the echo of centuries of resilience. And that emotional power, the triumph of human potential over structural disadvantage, is what makes India's ascent so compelling, so magnetic, so deeply transformative. In the end, what shocks the US there is not that India has achieved something remarkable, but that it has done so on its own terms. India has proven that a nation can remain deeply rooted in its culture while shaping the future of global technology. It has turned diversity into strength, adversity into advantage, and skepticism into belief. The world expected India to follow the well-trodden path of development. Instead, it carved its own. That is the real shot. That innovation no longer speaks with one accent. That the future no longer belongs to one geography. India, once the observer, is now the innovator, and the world is watching in awe. At the heart of India's stunning rise lies a principle that has quietly redefined the nation's trajectory. Self-reliance blended with strategic vision. This is not the isolationist self-reliance of the past, but a modern, confident philosophy rooted in innovation, independence, and integration with the global economy. The world, particularly the United States, is taken aback because India's latest achievement demonstrates how a nation can chart its own course without waiting for validation from others. The shock comes not from the outcome, but from the discipline and foresight that brought India here. A masterclass in long-term planning that few saw coming. For decades, India was seen as dependent on Western technology, foreign capital, and imported expertise. Those days are over. The story of modern India is the story of a country that refused to remain a consumer of others' innovations and chose instead to become a creator of its own. The idea of Atmanirbhar Bharat, or self-reliant India, is not a slogan. It is a strategy. It is about building capacity, fostering local industries, and developing technological sovereignty while engaging confidently with the world. What stuns Washington is not India's ambition, but the fact that it has achieved global competitiveness without surrendering its autonomy. Look at the scale of this transformation. In semiconductors, India is building a domestic manufacturing base to compete in a sector long dominated by the West and East Asia. In defense, it is developing indigenous systems that reduce dependency while enhancing national security. In clean energy, India is emerging as a pioneer, building massive solar parks and electric mobility networks that signal not imitation, but innovation. The strategic vision behind this progress is clear. India is not simply reacting to global trends, it is anticipating them, aligning its economic, technological, and diplomatic moves like pieces on a vast geopolitical chessboard. The United States is surprised because it is witnessing a nation that has quietly mastered the art of strategic autonomy in an era of dependency. What makes this even more remarkable is how India has blended pragmatism with principle. it has learned to walk the fine line between cooperation and competition. While building partnerships with the US, Europe, and Japan, it has also nurtured strong ties with Russia and the global South. While joining Western-led technological initiatives, it continues to promote indigenous platforms and local enterprise. This is a calculated balancing act, a testament to the maturity of India's foreign and economic policy. America's astonishment is not just about what India has achieved materially. It is about how deftly India has maintained its independence of decision, making in a world of alignments and pressures. The roots of this achievement are deeply psychological. For too long, India was told to follow, to adopt, to imitate. But self-reliance has ignited a quiet revolution in national confidence. It has created a mindset that no longer looks outward for approval, but inward for strength. Every startup launched, every product designed, every satellite launched under the Make in India initiative is an act of belief, a declaration that India's destiny will no longer be written elsewhere. The US, a country built on its own narrative of self-made success, recognizes the power of that psychological shift. It sees in India a mirror of its own past, a rising nation with unshakable faith in its ability to shape its future. India's approach to self-reliance is refreshingly modern. It rejects the old notion that independence means isolation. Instead, it embraces a global vision, one where collaboration is guided by equality, not dependency. When India shares its digital infrastructure with developing nations, it isn't merely offering technology, it is sharing empowerment. When it partners in global vaccine manufacturing, it isn't just producing doses, it's saving lives. That is what separates India's model from traditional power politics. It leads not through dominance, but through example. This humane and strategic self-reliance is what has truly shaken traditional powers like the US, who now see in India not a junior partner, but a co-architect of global solutions. How India has used self-reliance to fuel national purpose. It has become a unifying force, blending government policy, private innovation, and citizen pride into one national rhythm. Across villages and cities, from the smallest entrepreneur to the largest tech visionary, there is a shared understanding that India must stand on its own feet, not out of defiance, but out of dignity. The nation's self-reliance is not an act of rebellion, it is an act of self-respect. The United States, which once viewed India through the lens of development assistance and partnership asymmetry, now faces a new reality. India no longer seeks validation, only collaboration. The shock in Washington is the recognition that India has evolved into a nation that shapes its destiny while commanding global respect. It is the quiet power of preparation meeting the right moment. India has shown that true sovereignty in the modern world is not about closing borders or resisting change. It is about owning one's choices, building one's strengths, and moving forward with clarity of purpose. And that is what makes the world, and especially the United States, take notice, because this self-reliant, strategically visionary India is not waiting for the future, it is defining it. In the 21st century, the currency of power is no longer measured in tanks or territory. It is measured in technology. The nations that command the flow of data design and digital infrastructure now command the direction of the world. That is where India's latest achievement becomes revolutionary and why it has caught the United States off guard. India has quietly built a foundation of technological sovereignty, a new kind of power that does not rely on domination but on innovation. What shocks Washington is that this transformation happened not with fanfare or confrontation, but with disciplined ambition and the conviction that technology must serve the many, not the few. India's digital revolution has unfolded with breathtaking scope and speed. In just a few years, it has created one of the world's most inclusive and scalable technology ecosystems, connecting more than 1 billion people into a unified digital framework. The UPI system, for example, processes billions of transactions every month, more than the combined volumes of Visa and MasterCard in several developed economies. This isn't merely an economic tool, it is a symbol of sovereignty. It represents the ability of a nation to design, deploy, and control its own digital architecture rather than depending on foreign systems. For a world long used to Silicon Valley dominance, India's self-sufficient model of innovation has redefined what technological leadership looks like. But what truly sets India apart is the philosophy behind this progress. Unlike many Western innovations that are driven by profit and exclusivity, India's model is grounded in accessibility and public welfare. Its digital public infrastructure is open source, interoperable, and designed for inclusion. It doesn't lock people out. It brings them in. When a farmer in a remote village can access financial services, or a student can obtain an education certificate through a national digital ID, that is power. Real, transformative power. It is the democratization of technology, something that the United States, despite its wealth of innovation, has struggled to achieve at such scale. This is what makes India's achievement not just impressive, but paradigm shifting. The US is realizing that India's approach challenges the very structure of technological power that dominated the last century. For decades, the global South was treated as a consumer of Western technologies. India has flipped that equation by becoming both a creator and exporter of digital solutions. From health platforms to AI-enabled governance systems, Indian models are now being adopted across Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America. The shock in Washington is that India has built a system that is not only efficient, but replicable, a digital blueprint that empowers developing nations to grow without depending on Western infrastructure. In a sense, India has done what no one thought possible. It has turned innovation into diplomacy, technology into influence, and inclusion into a global brand. Behind this transformation lies an extraordinary coordination between vision and execution. India's government laid down a digital backbone, but it was the private sector startups and citizens who breathed life into it. This synergy between policy and people is what gives India's digital ecosystem its resilience. The United States, accustomed to corporate-driven technological revolutions, is astonished by how India has balanced state facilitation with market freedom. It's a model that blends governance and innovation, central planning and entrepreneurship, a hybrid formula that the world's top economies are now studying with fascination. A deeper layer to this story. India's technological sovereignty is not just about digital systems. It is about identity. For centuries, India's image in the global imagination was tied to its cultural richness, its democracy, and its population size. But today, it is technology that defines its modern identity. The smartphone has become the new symbol of empowerment, the data center, the new temple of progress. The world sees a nation that no longer consumes technology. It shapes it. And that shift from user to creator is what unsettles the traditional order. It signals that innovation is no longer monopolized by the West. The US, long the epicenter of digital power, now faces a world where leadership is shared, decentralized, and diverse. And India is at the center of that transformation. How India has humanized technology. While much of the world debates the dangers of artificial intelligence, surveillance, and inequality, India has shown that technology can still be a force for good. It can uplift the poor, empower the marginalized, and bridge gaps that politics alone cannot. This is the moral dimension of India's technological sovereignty. It isn't power for dominance, but power for dignity. It is this moral clarity, coupled with technological mastery, that truly shocks and inspires the world's most powerful nations. India's achievement is not a momentary triumph. It is the emergence of a new global paradigm, one in which technology becomes the great equalizer, and India, the nation that redefined what power means in the digital age. The astonishment that ripples through Washington and across the Western world at India's latest achievement is not merely about a technological or economic milestone. It is about what that success symbolizes. Beneath the numbers and innovation lies a deeper, quieter revolution, the transformation of global power itself. For the first time in modern history, a major shift is unfolding without the permission of traditional powers. The US shock is not born from India's growth alone, but from the realization that the center of gravity in world affairs is moving. And India is one of the forces redefining it. The old assumption that leadership flows only from the West has fractured. The world is no longer waiting for instruction. It is building its own path. For decades, the post-World War II order rested on a hierarchy. The West would lead and others would follow. But that architecture, designed for a different century, is no longer sufficient for the complexities of today's interconnected world. India's rise exposes this reality with clarity and confidence. Unlike previous global powers that rose through conquest or coercion, India's ascent is powered by ideas, innovation, and inclusivity. Its progress challenges the notion that wealth must be extracted for a nation to advance. Instead, India has shown that prosperity can be created from within through education technology and democratic participation. The US is witnessing something it did not anticipate. A new power that is assertive yet cooperative, competitive yet constructive, modern yet deeply rooted in its civilizational values. This is why India's achievement feels seismic. It is not just another economic success. It is a philosophical shift in the way the world perceives progress. For much of the 20th century, global dominance was associated with military might and economic control. But India's rise tells a different story, that power can come from moral authority, technological equity, and social resilience. The US now sees a nation that commands influence not by imposing itself, but by inspiring others. This is the essence of a multipolar world, not one hegemon replaced by another, but many nations shaping the global narrative together. India's success, therefore, represents the democratization of global power, a development that simultaneously surprises and challenges old systems. The transformation taking place is not confrontational, it is evolutionary. India does not seek to disrupt the world order through defiance, but to transform it through balance. It stands as a bridge between the developed and developing worlds, the East and the West, the rich and the rising. This dual role makes it uniquely positioned in global affairs and uniquely unpredictable for those accustomed to a binary world view. The shock for the United States lies in realizing that the world's most dynamic partner is also its most independent one. India's ability to cooperate with Washington while maintaining strategic partnerships with Moscow, and to engage with China while strengthening alliances in the Indo-Pacific, shows a level of geopolitical maturity that few nations have mastered. There, India's diplomacy mirrors its technological strategy agile, adaptive, and anchored in national interest. While others are locked in ideological rivalries, India moves with a quiet, deliberate confidence. It participates in Western-led initiatives like the Quad, yet it also leads the Global South in forums like the G20, amplifying the voices of developing nations that have long been ignored. This balanced diplomacy marks a profound shift in global power dynamics. It signals the end of an era where moral authority was monopolized by a few. Now, nations from the Global South are shaping the world's agenda on climate, digital governance, and equitable trade. India's success embodies this new balance, where collaboration replaces coercion and inclusivity replaces dominance. What unsettles Washington most is the calmness of India's power. It does not shout, it simply performs. There, it does not threaten, it delivers. This quiet confidence unnerves those who equated power with aggression. India's steady rise exposes a truth that has long been ignored, that genuine leadership does not require the shadow of empire. It requires consistency, credibility, and character. And these are precisely the attributes India has cultivated over decades. The United States, once the undisputed moral and technological leader, now finds itself studying India's ability to achieve both growth and stability without sacrificing its sovereignty or its soul. India's rise represents a collective awakening, not just for one nation, but for the entire developing world. It tells billions across Africa, Asia, and Latin America that progress no longer needs to come with dependency. It redefines ambition for nations once told to wait their turn. The US shock, therefore, is not fear of competition, but the realization that the world it once led unilaterally is now thriving through diversity. The emergence of a multipolar order does not weaken the world, it strengthens it. It multiplies creativity, distributes opportunity, and restores balance. And at the heart of this transformation stands India, a nation proving that leadership in the 21st century will not come from domination, but from direction, not from control, but from collaboration. In this moment of global redefinition, the world's surprise at India's success is, in truth, the sound of history adjusting itself, the quiet but undeniable hum of a new world being born. Every great nation has a story of struggle behind its moments of glory, and India's is perhaps one of the most profound in modern history. The US? Shock at India's latest achievement is not just about technological prowess or economic success. It is about how a nation, long tested by adversity, has transformed hardship into strength and uncertainty into innovation. The world has often admired India's diversity and endurance, but what it underestimated was the creative energy that thrives under challenge. India's journey from scarcity to scale, from survival to leadership, is a masterclass in resilience. And it is this resilience that now powers its innovation engine. The world did not see it coming, because India's revolution was not loud. It was patient, persistent, and purpose-driven. In the corridors of Silicon Valley and the think tanks of Washington, few believed that a nation once burdened by poverty and bureaucracy could rise to become a hub of technological innovation. Yet that is exactly what has happened. India's entrepreneurs, scientists, and policymakers have built a future from the fragments of struggle. Where others saw obstacles, Indians saw opportunities. A lack of resources became a call for frugality. Institutional complexity became a breeding ground for adaptability. What the West calls disruption, India calls necessity-born creativity. The ability to find world-class solutions with minimal means. It is a philosophy forged in constraint and refined in hope. This is what has truly stunned the US, the discovery that adversity itself has been India's greatest teacher. Consider the innovation ecosystem that has emerged from this spirit. India's startup culture did not evolve in luxury. It grew in chaos. It was nurtured by young dreamers who coded in small rooms, often with unstable power supply, but unshakable determination. These were not entrepreneurs chasing fame. They were problem solvers designing for the realities of everyday life. From fintech platforms that brought banking to the unbanked, to healthcare innovations reaching rural villages, every breakthrough was born from empathy and urgency. This grassroots creativity has given India an edge the world cannot ignore. It builds not for the elite, but for the billions, turning local challenges into global opportunities. The US, accustomed to innovation flowing from billion-dollar labs, is now witnessing a revolution powered by resilience, not resources. Behind this wave of innovation lies a cultural force that runs deep in India's psyche. The belief that failure is not the end, but the beginning of mastery. For generations, Indians have lived with unpredictability, learning to adapt quickly to change. This cultural agility is now the backbone of the nation's progress. When a young Indian engineer fails, he doesn't give up, he iterates. When a scientist is told something is impossible, she works quietly until she proves otherwise. This mindset, forged through decades of struggle, has now matured into a national character of innovation. And that character is what shocks the world, a realization that India's success is not accidental, but inevitable. How deeply human India's innovation journey is. It is not built on the pursuit of dominance, but on the desire to improve lives. Every invention carries a moral purpose. Whether it is digital payment systems that empower the poor, renewable energy initiatives, protect the environment, or AI-driven platforms for education, India's progress speaks a language of empathy. This emotional intelligence in innovation, a quality often missing in purely profit-driven models, is what makes India's approach both unique and powerful. It reminds the world that technology must serve humanity, not replace it. For the United States, this is a paradigm shift. Its shock is not in seeing India succeed, but in realizing that India has redefined the meaning of success. In a world where innovation is often measured by market capitalization, India measures it by impact. It builds not to dominate markets, but to democratize access. And this moral dimension, this human-centric approach to progress, is what has quietly made India the world's laboratory for inclusive innovation. America, with all its might, now looks at India and sees a competitor, yes, but also a mirror of its own foundational ideals, ingenuity, perseverance, and the pursuit of the common good. Every achievement India celebrates today carries the fingerprints who refuse to surrender to circumstance. From rural innovators to urban visionaries, from coders in Bangalore to scientists in ISRO, the story is the same: faith in possibility amid limitation. This is why India's rise resonates so deeply, and why it shakes global assumptions so profoundly. It reminds the world that progress does not belong to those born into advantage. It belongs to those who dare to create it. The US may be shocked by India's latest achievement, but in truth, it is witnessing the timeless power of resilience, proof that when a nation learns to transform struggle into strength, it becomes unstoppable. When the United States looks at India's latest achievement, what truly shocks? It is not just the scale of the accomplishment, but the message it sends about the shifting center of global power. For decades, the world believed that innovation, leadership, and progress were the exclusive domain of the West. But now, India stands as undeniable proof that the 21st century belongs to those who dare to think differently, those who believe that greatness is not inherited, it is earned. The US finds itself watching a country it once saw as a developing nation now shaping the global conversation, setting new standards and driving technological and economic revolutions that others are forced to follow. That realization is as humbling as it is electrifying. India's achievement is not just national pride. It is a geopolitical signal. The rise of India is rewriting the global order. Its innovation, economic strategy, and diplomatic assertiveness are recalibrating the balance of power from the West to the global South. This transformation shocks Washington because it defies the old playbook of dominance through wealth and military might. India's power does not come from coercion. It comes from collaboration, inclusion, and the credibility of success built on merit. The US is watching a new model of leadership take shape, one that relies not on imposing influence, but on inspiring it. India's digital revolution, for example, is now being studied in global policy circles not just as a technical success, but as a philosophical blueprint, a model that fuses technology with social equity. What adds to the US astonishment is the way India has leveraged its democracy as a strength, not a stumbling block. Many in the West long assumed that rapid development required centralized control, yet India has shown that pluralism and progress can coexist. It has proven that innovation can emerge from the chaos of diversity. That democracy can be an engine of creativity rather than a constraint. The ability to unite a billion voices into a coherent vision has become India's greatest strength. In this, the US sees a reflection of its own founding ideals: freedom, opportunity, and enterprise, but expressed in a distinctly modern, distinctly Indian way. And that mirror both inspires and unsettles Washington there, because it shows that the ideals it once championed globally are now being perfected elsewhere. There is also a strategic dimension to this shock. India's success has made it not just a regional player, but a global pivot. From space exploration to artificial intelligence, renewable energy to digital infrastructure, India is no longer a participant. It is a leader. It collaborates with the US, yes, but it no longer depends on it. This independence, both in policy and capability, is what truly redefines the power dynamic. When India successfully lands missions on the moon or launches satellites at a fraction of NASA's cost, it sends a clear signal: efficiency and innovation are not monopolies of the rich. The world's most populous democracy is showing that talent, not wealth, determines leadership. For the US, this challenges not only its technological supremacy, but its psychological comfort as the global pace setter. Behind the shock lies a growing sense of respect. Because what India's achievement represents is not a challenge born of hostility. It is a challenge born of inspiration. It proves that nations can rise through knowledge, innovation, and moral conviction. India's success story tells the developing world that dependency is a choice, not a destiny. It tells the West that competition can be healthy when it elevates everyone. The US, in its heart, recognizes that India's rise strengthens the global order rather than destabilizes it. Still, the shock remains, because for the first time, Washington must share the stage with a nation whose success cannot be attributed to imitation, but to originality. What makes this moment even more profound is the emotional undercurrent. India's progress carries a story the world cannot ignore, the story of a nation that once fought for freedom from external rule and now leads others towards self-reliance. It is the story of engineers who once studied American technology and now create breakthroughs that American firms license. It is the story of a generation that no longer looks west for validation, but forward with vision. The United States sees this and realizes something deeply transformative is happening. India has stopped asking for acknowledgement. It has started commanding it. The global shock, therefore, is not just about achievement, it's about awakening. The awakening of a billion minds, the surge of confidence that comes from knowing the future is no longer scripted elsewhere. In the eyes of the US, this is both awe-inspiring and unsettling, because it means the monopoly of influence is ending. India has stepped into history not as a follower of power, but as a creator of it. The sound America hears today is not the echo of competition. It is the heartbeat of a new world order, one in which innovation has an Indian accent, leadership has an Eastern rhythm, and the future belongs to those who believe that the impossible is simply the next thing to achieve.